Okay, we still have about 5 minutes, but we're getting pretty full. So before we start every session, we ask you a few questions to kind of decide where we're going to go with this presentation, because the presentation is very long, and so we're not able to get through all of it. If you have the Attendee Hub app, you will have our presentation on that app, and it is in the PDF version, and so you are more than welcome to follow us on that or print it off or whatever you need to do. Also, if you aren't able to get on an app, totally understandable, let us know. We will have our cards available, and you can certainly email us, and we'll get you a copy of that. But before we start, also if you're on the Attendee app, you can rate us at the end of it, and so it only says like 1 to 5 stars, so it doesn't tell us any feedback, but it always helps us know if we're doing okay or not. So let us know how we do. So what we do is we try to get through the majority of it, but we never get to the end of the presentation, which goes over self-care, and then a few of the other intervention strategies that we encourage. So please go back and review those since we don't get to them. It is warm in here. I think everyone in Durant, Oklahoma is aware that it is warm in here because we have told everybody. But it is hot outside, and I guess they're working on it. So please take care of yourself how you need. We probably will leave the door open because of that. I know that kind of has distractions involved, but okay, so the first 2 questions are very easy, and they so one of the practices that we've learned about trauma-informed work is that asking kids to raise their hand is sometimes very difficult for them. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. This is the first session I've remembered that 5 trips. So I'm really proud of myself. But this is something that's recommended. This is actually a little bit easier for kids to do. And if you're standing at the front of the room, you usually can see everybody who does this. They can put it on their table. They can just put it for their chest. But so the question is, if you're a counselor, thumbs up. Okay. If you're a teacher, thumbs up. Principal or administrator? Okay. Perfect. If you are familiar with ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, thumbs up. Okay. Not a problem at all. We will start there and we will go over that. So we have 2 minutes. I think we might go ahead and get started because we're pretty full. We are being live streamed, so just know that. And then also, if for any reason you need to step out, whatever, we are repeating this session at 2 o'clock today in the same room. We have added that to the last 3 stops because we've had to do that for a couple different stops. We're going to go ahead and get started. You guys good with that? Okay. All right. So we'll turn off our meditation music. Obviously, that is purposeful because we like to be trauma-informed, and part of being trauma-informed is understanding all sensory things going on. So we're going to start out by just introducing who we are. Oh, CEUs, I forgot about that. If you need CEUs, you will get CEUs for this session. You will sign this. This is what we keep in case you are ever audited, we're ever audited. And then at the end, we will hand out the CEU credit for each presentation that was approved. Okay. So I'm Kristen, actually. I'm the Executive Director of Counseling at the State Department of Education.
I'm Elizabeth Suddeth. I'm the Director of Prevention Services at the State Department of Education.
So what we like to say about ourselves is Elizabeth is a prevention person. She is prevention-minded. She thinks very globally and thinks about things before we get to crisis. I am intervention. I think about things once we've gotten to crisis, what do we need to do now to restore a healthy behavior, healthy lifestyle, whatever it is. So we are a team, and we like to think about it as a team approach because it's very important for our schools to understand that prevention is very different than intervention, and it's very different and can be very different than just counseling in general. So that's why we're both here presenting on this. So when I say these words, what comes to mind? Trauma. Could be anything. These answers are not wrong or right. Abuse?
Death
Neglect?
in the family.
Death? Very good.
Car accidents.
Yes, absolutely, car accidents. When I say trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive, because some people believe it goes either way, what do you hear? What do you think about? Awareness? Sadness? Understanding? Like it. Trauma-informed instruction.
Not sure
Okay.
where kids that have, yeah, and like if you're reading a story in English about the death of a parent and you have a child that has the parent die, you need to be very aware of how they are perceiving the whole story.
Yeah, very good. Okay. So this is what we know. Trauma can be anything because we are all going through this life and we really expect to have a certain trajectory, right? We expect things for our life, but really what trauma is anything that changes the brain's development. So we know that the brain is not fully developed until age 25. A lot can happen to your brain from 0 to 25. That is healthy and typical. But what trauma is when something has altered the brain's pattern and the brain's functioning. A lot of the examples we see, especially in Oklahoma, are abuse, assault, natural disaster, and death of other people, obviously. We really need to clarify that. Not that death is funny, but every time I'm like, death of other people, because yes, death can alter the brain very easily. So really it's anything, and it depends on the person and their circumstances, which makes this very complicated. So we know that adverse childhood experiences are a part of trauma. In this study, which a few of you had a thumbs up that said you are aware of it, those of you who are not, we really challenge you and encourage you to go back and learn a little bit more about it, because what we give is very brief today, but we will give you resources for that. So in 1985, Dr. Vincent Folletti is what I've heard, and I've also heard Folletti, so I'm honestly not sure what his name is. But he noticed that his patients were coming to his obesity clinic and they were losing a drastic amount of weight. And it was incredible, and he was really proud of his patients. But what would happen is they would leave and they would gain it back. And as a medical professional, he has to ask himself what's going on. So as a researcher, again, he goes and does some face-to-face interviews. What changed his medical profession, really probably changed his life, is he did an interview and a woman said she had been raped. And what she said is, to be overweight is to be overlooked. And that's the way I need to be. Her traumatic past had been so difficult for her that to gain weight was to cover that, the hurt and the pain up, but it also protected her from being assaulted again. So he did more interviews and he discovered that patients had been using addiction and negative coping skills as a normal response to serious childhood trauma. A normal response. That's not okay. So the CDC picked it up, and they, with Dr. Vincent Folletti, decided to do this study that we now call the ACEs study. There are 10 indicators on the ACEs study, and these are the childhood traumas that were studied in 1985 and moving forward. We have heard there is talk of more research being done, and that more indicators will be added to the list. So we're going to go over these very briefly, but I'm sure you're already very familiar with these. There's 3 different categories we like to say in abuse. It's physical, emotional, and sexual. We see this a lot. We see the symptoms of it. We also can feel the symptoms of emotional abuse. This is one that can be more silent, the sexual abuse. We know that 1 in 4 females will experience sexual abuse, and 1 in 6 males. So if you have, let's say, unfortunately, 25 to 30 kids in your class, those numbers are awful. If you think about neglect, we have physical and emotional. And then household dysfunctions. Household dysfunctions are a parent with mental illness, usually untreated. So not responding to treatment, not engaging in treatment. So just symptomology from mental illness. We also know that mothers being treated violently in domestic violence, divorce, substance abuse, and incarcerated relative. These are the 10 childhood adversity indicators. So if you have an ACE score of 3, you have 3 of these experiences in your childhood, okay? What we like to encourage you is, if you are sitting here and you're reading these, you could be thinking about students. Going, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm about to tell you what that means. The other thing you might be doing is you might be sitting here thinking of your own ACE score. We like to encourage you to take care of yourself, because this topic can be very difficult and complicated, and it's very triggering for some people. I will talk about a very personal experience here in a few minutes that really taught me what it was like for my kids to sit in class and to be triggered into situations. But I also want to talk about when we started doing this work. I just came from Norman Public Schools. I was the student advocacy coordinator at Norman High School. We started doing trauma-informed work 2 school years ago. And we had a teacher come and talk to our executive team just about how we're delivering messages and how we're just kind of all getting in a room and going through trauma. And we weren't really thinking about the emotional capacity our teachers had and some other stuff. She said, when we started going over this, she had to sit in her seat and realize, not only do I, as an adult, have an ACE score, I think she had a 4, she realized she gave her kid a 3, her own child. She gave her kid an ACE score of 3 is the way she phrased it. That's not my words, those are hers. Because she said she was in an abusive relationship, so she left him, but now she's experiencing anxiety and depression. And so that was really hard. As we are educators, people have invested in lives. We've chosen this profession because we care about people. We also have to know we are people, we are not robots, and we have to take care of ourselves. So what we know about the ACE score is there's a strong correlation when there's a higher ACE score for individuals who are experiencing the following issues. Social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. I'm sure you're already thinking, I see this in my classroom, I see these in the hallways, I see this all the time. But there's also the health risk behaviors, disease, disability, social problems, and unfortunately early death. Those with an ACE score of 3 or higher are more at risk for becoming a smoker, an alcoholic, a drug user, to be violent, to have multiple marriages, broken bones, use prescriptions, depression, autoimmune disease, and work absences. So obviously for your classrooms, you're not going to start seeing all of these things, especially if you're elementary. You may not be seeing multiple marriages clearly. But what we know about kids who have high ACE scores, they are being raised by people who have high ACE scores. These are your parents that you're working with. This is the context of the home your kids are going home to every day. 45% of Oklahoma's children have an ACE score of 3 or higher. Not shocking, right? No. We're like, okay, yeah, I already know this. This is Dr. Nadine Burke. We absolutely love this entire video. She will speak from a medical professional background, which we truly appreciate because we are not medical professionals. I am a counselor, and Elizabeth is a prevention person, and so she can explain things about the brain that we just simply cannot, so we have to use her. We will not show you the entire thing. It's about 15 minutes. We're going to show you just about, 2 to 3 minutes of it, but please go back. This is a TED Talk. If you just put Dr. Nadine Burke, you will find it and be able to watch all of it.
In the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me,
So that video is really great if you want to know the whole beginning of that. She describes ACEs and how she's actually a pediatrician, right? So she implemented trauma-informed procedures in her practice. And so she goes into a lot of detail about ACEs. So if you want to look up Dr. Nadine Burke Ayers, that's a great video. So
Say her last name again.
Nadine Burke Harris.
Burke Ayers.
Burke Harris.
And if you forget any of this or can't find it, again, you can take a card. We'll email you any information you need.
Or even if you type ACEs into YouTube, you'll find some videos on there about it. So she describes fighting the bear. So this is what we like to talk about for the rest of the presentation, is how do we make schools, how do we make classrooms as bear-free as possible. So those bears that she describes are sending off those stress hormones. So the student's brain is being flooded by cortisol and all these stress hormones. And it really takes over their learning style. So actually when all of the brain is flooded with all of this, no new information can come in. So you might have listened to that and it might start to make a lot more sense of some of the students that you have in your classroom. So something she does mention in there as well is that this cortisol and this stress hormone that is constantly being flooded in a child's brain can always disrupt their immune system. So think about kids who are sick all the time or have to miss class all the time from being ill. There could be some other things going on there as well. So it just kind of starts putting the whole child into more of a context of what's going on. So learning only occurs when a student feels safe. Okay, so when they're feeling that their heart racing and that cortisol, then no learning can occur. And we will go over that a lot more in detail in the next couple of slides. Also, there's no problem solving that can take place. So this might make a lot of sense too. There's no problem solving skills going on. So a lot of times we say, why did you make that choice? Or that was a wrong choice. What were you thinking? Can you work through this?
I do have a couple of customers over there.
Okay.
Just maybe put that on your badge here.
Okay.
And then, do you have a pocket or anything? No.
I actually do.
Oh, that's even better.
I love dresses with pockets. I knew I wore this for a reason today. Oh. Okay. So this is where those problem-solving skills are not happening. So really when we start seeing these things happening in the classroom, we start thinking, okay, maybe there's a bear going on here. Maybe the student is being triggered by something. It's that flight, fight, or freeze feeling that they are going through. So a lot of times we hear of fight or flight. That has been something that I always heard of, and I love that they have added on freeze. So fight or flight is just that basic instinct that you have when something is coming at you. Freeze is actually, it's exactly what it is. You freeze. We see this a lot in victims of sexual violence. So they get asked all the time, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you scream? Why haven't you told anybody about the abuse that is happening? Why didn't you leave that situation? This is actually that freeze response. So the body actually does freeze, and all of the blood drains from the extremities to start protecting the heart, because the heart is a vital organ. So really, the blood can be drained from the vocal cords, so screaming can't happen. Telling somebody what's going on can't happen. That student who doesn't respond to you when they're really triggered, they can't because they can't talk. So that really made a lot more sense when this freeze was described to me. And then this feeling, it always reminds me of when I was younger, and me and my brother would always jump out, hide around corners and jump out one another, try and scare each other. So a lot of times I would run away screaming, flight, or I would stand there scared, freeze. And then one time I did it to him and I realized his reaction was fight, and I never did that again.
But we all have had that startled feeling, that feeling that, it's just our body's natural reaction to what's going on. And that's what those students are feeling all the time when they're being triggered by those cortisol levels. A lot of times, it just takes a couple of minutes and our heart rate starts to go back down. We can start regulating again. But students who are constantly exposed, their brain actually becomes desensitized. And when your brain becomes desensitized, you cannot regulate back down to normal levels of cortisol in the brain. So it takes a little bit longer, and it takes other strategies to start regulating again. So speaking about the brain, I am not a brain expert by any means, but these are the 3 areas that we like to go over that really explains how that cortisol is affecting the brain. So the neocortex is this higher order thinking. So this is where personality is. This is where communication styles are. This is where all of the problem solving and thinking is taking place. So we want students to be in this higher order brain, and you may have learned about this in learning styles. And then if a student is triggered or there's a bear that pops up for them, they go down into limbic brain. So this is the primitive brain. So the only thing that the student is running or an adolescent is running on here is emotions. Okay, so you might see emotions just very chaotic. You might see emotions erupt. You might see a lot of different things. We sometimes refer to that as a meltdown in the classroom. Okay, this is going into that limbic brain. And then lower is brainstem. So this is survival. This is the brain's reaction of, I just need to survive this situation however possible. Again, flooding of that cortisol leads to this. So you might think about, if you've ever done something in a situation, kind of your body just takes over and you think back and you're like, I have no idea how I just got through that, but I made it through somehow. That's in that brainstem. That's going off of your body's just natural response to surviving. Okay. So when you came in, we did have therapeutic music playing. So that actually is a great way to get out of the limbic brain and back into a higher order brain. There are some great strategies. Doing any type of physical movement can get back out of that limbic brain up into that higher order. There's a lot of great strategies in a book that we will show you at the end today if you want to come take a picture of this. But there's great ways to get students, get classrooms back into that higher order brain. So learning more about the brain, going into a little bit more detail, there are 3 different zones that you might experience students in. So the red zone, this is when the student is in that fight or flight response. So literally they might flight out of your room, right? We've had students just run out of the room. Fight, we've seen the fight response possibly happen. They are feeling anxiety and overwhelmed, okay? This is when they have flipped from that higher order down into the limbic brain. Thinking is rigid or chaotic. Again, it's like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? We have no idea. There's no pattern of behavior that we can see going on. In this red zone, no new learning can take place. Okay, so if we have a student who is experiencing one of those bears, who is fighting one of those bears in their brain at the moment, and then we're giving them a math worksheet to complete, or we're trying to teach a new concept, there's no new learning that is going to be able to take place here. And then we have the blue zone. So this is the withdrawn student. This is the student that is experiencing maybe depression. Just a little bit more numb. Maybe you ask, hello, are you here? Like, are you connecting with me? Are you hearing anything that I'm saying? This is also a student who is in that limbic brain. And this is maybe more of that freeze response that you see. But again, no new learning can take place here either. So ideally, we would want to see students in the green zone. So this is where social engagement is active and can feel a full range of emotions. So anger is still an emotion. Okay, so if you have students who are experiencing fear or anger, that's not a bad thing. But students in the green zone can self-regulate back into a place that they are still able to learn. They are curious, compassionate. This is where new learning can take place. Okay, so in this green zone. So to say that you are going to have your school or you're going to have your classroom in the green zone 100% of the time with all students, it's probably not realistic, right? But what we like to promote is just to do whatever you can in your classroom with the environment and the way that you are interacting with students to promote the most students in the green zone. And then don't take it on personally if you don't have students always all in this green zone. I feel like that is really easy to do, right? If we have more students in the red zone today or more students in the blue zone, it's really easy to take that on like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But all you can do is promote a place, promote an environment, promote your interactions that allow the most students to be in this green zone. And we will talk more about that. Okay, so this next video we are going to watch. When I was first going into classrooms, I was doing behavior interventions with students, and I thought, oh my goodness, what if I don't have the right thing to say? What if a student comes to me and I don't know how to talk to them? I don't know how to, solve their problems. And then I watched this and I realized, oh, okay, this is easier than it sounds. So this is a video about empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I have it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. So one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. That's right. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Isn't it good? We love showing that video because it's that simple. And we always start out this presentation by talking to you about ACEs and about trauma and how difficult it can be. And that can be a little daunting because you already know that's going on in your classroom. You're like, okay, thanks for the reminder. But we want to give you hope that it really starts with connection. It starts with building relationships. And we will go a little bit into this book, and I really encourage it because it's so step-by-step. It's so easy. And it's by Jim Sporleader and Heather Forbes. And we found it on Amazon for like $50-some, so you can write a small foundation grant or something like that to get it. But it can be for the classroom, or it can be for an entire school. It could be for an entire district. It's highly recommended. Like in chapter 15, it's just step by step, like literally August to September, work on these things. It sets the foundation with introducing parents at registration, like to have water and coffee, to just kind of have a welcoming environment for your parents who may not love school. You know, it's just really good. But and we'll have it up here if you need to take a picture of it as well or look through it. I definitely don't mind. So we've learned about ACEs. We've talked about the brain. Some of you may be totally bought in, and some of you may not, and that's okay. Because you're here probably tells me you've already started going, I really need a little bit more help with this. I want to tell you about my aha moment. The moment I decided, I get it now. You know, Oprah, I think, coined the term aha, but, you know, this is my moment. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. And it can be triggering for you if you've had trauma in your past. So I can be vulnerable enough to say I have an ACE score of a 0. I'm very thankful that I had wonderful parents and a loving household, and we had the resources that we need. And anytime we did have rough things, like, you know, dad lost his job or something like that, we always bounced back. We had resilience in my family. My biggest trauma came at age 30. And most people know about the trauma that happened to me. Not that it happened to me, but they know about it because it was very public. It was nationally public, actually. And if you've attended any crisis training with the State Department, OSSI, you've seen my video. I was a survivor of the May 20th, 2013 tornado that hit more public schools. I was the counselor at Plaza Towers. So I survived that day, but 7 of my kids did not. So I can tell you I have suffered trauma. And it's difficult to stand in front of crowds and tell you that. But I can share that because I've had really good therapy, and I have a master's degree, and I have a fully developed brain. But I'm going to tell you about a situation that happened to me that changed everything for my career. So I'm sitting in a presentation about suicide and crisis and how we help kids and how we respond. Sitting in a room full of counselors, administrators, and we had a speaker, and she was a national speaker. She's from the Northeast, and she's a phenomenal person. I love her now. I got to know her. But she came to Oklahoma, and I think she was trying to connect with us, like we all try to do with our audience. And she said, you know, suicide and crisis, it's like a tornado. And she decided to display an active tornado on the screen. You've lost me, right? My brain just flipped. I am in survival mode, and I'm working through fight, flight, or freeze. What's good about the situation is that I was able to work through fight, flight, or freeze. I was kind of rotating back, front, back, you know. I really wanted to verbally fight her. Like, terrible idea, take that off the screen now. I also wanted to run out of the room, screaming and crying. But I decided to sit, what every good professional would do. I started playing with the emojis on my phone, right? And I was able to get through. But in that moment, I knew what it felt like to be one of my students, to be sitting in English class and to be triggered by the literature, to be sitting in math class and to be told I'm wrong again, and to convince myself I am a failure, to walk into a classroom of totally unknown people on the first day of school and to feel isolated and like I don't belong. I knew what it was like for my kids, and I knew I could never be the same counselor ever again. And I know that's probably why you're sitting in this room, because you can't be the same person. You can't walk into this 2018-2019 school year. We heard a quote at the trauma-informed conference we went to in St. Louis last month, and it was from Sherry or Shelley, yeah. So she's a teacher in Nevada. She was on Ellen. She was great. She was a wonderful speaker. But she said, if you know what you know and you see what you see and you don't do anything different, you are negligent. And I don't want you to be negligent to your children. And I know you don't want to be negligent to your students. But if you know what you know, we're learning it today, and you see what you see every day in your school, and you don't change anything, you are negligent. And I could never be negligent again. And I haven't been the same counselor. I am definitely not proud of the counselor I was before that moment. And I am pretty proud of the counselor I've become, but I still have work to do. So the message we continue to send you is, it is about building relationships. It's about connection, but it's also not about being perfect. So no, you will mess up, but that's such a modeling opportunity for your kids. So really capitalize those moments and do your best through them. So we're understanding ACEs. We're trying to create environments where children feel safe, emotionally and physically. You will not hear us say good and bad. good teachers, bad teachers. You will not hear us say right or wrong. We try to send the message of safe and unsafe, healthy and unhealthy. Those are words that have less judgment. And really, it's healthier for us to use that kind of language with our kids as well. That was not a bad choice always. Maybe that was not a healthy choice for you. We need to talk about that. So we can start to shift some of those language opportunities. So we need to help children identify feelings and manage emotions. They don't know how. Have mercy, we barely know how, right? We come in stressed out. This morning, for example, sit down on the bus with Elizabeth and we're chatting. And I was talking about I needed more coffee, and she was like, yeah, I did both cups. And I said, yeah, you have to turn the cup that way to get the coffee in it, because mine just ended up all over the counter and the floor. So I started off my morning a little dysregulated. Number one, because my coffee's everywhere, so now I'm cleaning that up, and I did not plan for that in my time management this morning. And then also, I now have less coffee, right? So we all know we get dysregulated, and we have to help our kids get regulated as well. But you know what? I came and I modeled that to you guys, and I said, look, I'm functioning on less coffee and a little disruptive morning of cleaning up. Model that for your kids and create a safe physical and emotional environment at home, school, and neighborhoods. I know you control about that much of school. You don't control those things. However, what we want you to start thinking about is, how do I bring things into my school, but how do I take my school to other places? I'm not saying you go knocking on doors and you sitting on couches. You don't have to do that. But we could start with neighborhoods. Is there a neighborhood library that you could have one of your parent nights at instead of the school? I don't know your communities. These are things you might have to brainstorm and talk through. We do like to say, try to get parents to come to the school in a fun, exciting environment. Believe me, I've done elementary and high school, and we've had plenty of parent nights where it's like, come get a free hot dog and read to your kid. Title I night, right? What did I really do to connect with that parent? Nothing. I got a free hot dog for them. What about having a paint night for the parents and for the kids? And you can paint with your kids. You get canvases. We call them Pinot and palette. I wouldn't encourage the Pinot, but you could encourage something else, some child punch and palettes. I don't know. Or you could offer maybe some yoga classes and an evening activity. And in those fun activities, incorporate self-care talk. Talk about kids, their brain development, healthy living, bedtime routines, healthy eating, things like that. We can get ways to get our parents to our school that really benefits them, and they might like that. I did work for one elementary. We had art night instead of carnival night. I hate carnival night. I'm going on the record. I have done it as a counselor and now as a parent, and my kids' fundraiser, the majority of their fundraiser is carnival night. I'm like, I will pay you, kid, $30 to not ask me to take you to carnival night. Mercy. Whew, I can get on my soapbox about carnival night. But maybe we had art night at that elementary school, and the kids made their art and they got to display it outside their classroom, but their parents actually got to buy it for like nothing, like $1 a project or something. We raised money, but then you also just got to talk about art and other things. So when we talk about kids, we're talking about empowering them. We want all of our kids to be successful. That is not the same thing for every kid. We are not pumping those kids out like a machine, right? They are not robots, and we are not expecting them to be the same. We have to find ways to empower our kids, and it's going to look different. But generally, there's less safe ways to do it, but there's safer ways to do it. So we know that kids like to work in collaboration. That doesn't mean every kid has to give feedback, because that can be scary for kids. It might be that I've had, since we've been on the road, this is our 5th stop, obviously, I've had lots of people reach out to us and say, I want to do our own student panel. Like in my classroom, I either want to do a student panel, because we've done that at Engage every day at 10. I had a superintendent send me a message 2 days ago to say, I think I'm going to do a student panel for my teachers on opening session when everybody comes back in August. And so how are we collaborating with our kids, but also, are you collaborating with your team? And I don't mean, hey, I'm going to make copies for you. I mean, are you guys talking through things like, are we having deep conversations about what's going on in our classrooms and how we can push each other and encourage each other? Also, we really say that too much talking can be hard. Now, I've had plenty of people say, I'm so tired of PD sessions where they don't model what they're actually asking teachers to do. And I'm going to talk, and Elizabeth's going to talk this entire thing, and we're telling you not to talk much. That's not a good modeling, but we're trying to get you the information. We actually would like to expand this training and do a lot more interactive and collaborative work, so just know we do like to practice what we preach, just not in this session. Flexibility. I use this example, and I don't mean this is the only example, but I really do encourage you to think about some of this flexibility. On the first day of school, what do? You go over procedures, right? This is how we walk in the hall. This is the basket where you turn in all your homework. This is your seat. Your pencils go here, all that. For some of your kids who have experienced trauma, the first day of school might be the scariest day ever. Do you think they remember half of what you said? They don't. And so how can we be flexible? On day 2, do we go over it again? On day 20, can we go over it again? You know what? We actually can. And I know that's hard because, no, we've moved on to content by day 20. I'm sorry. Procedures, that was day 1 and 2. So how can we be flexible? Can we just say on a Monday morning after fall break, hey, remember pencils are here, baskets there. Just kind of go over some of that. We can be flexible. And when they mess up, I'm guilty of this. I'm truly guilty of this with my own children. You know your dirty clothes go in the laundry basket, right? You know the homework's supposed to go in the basket, but how we respond with love and humility and flexibility is really important for our kids. Being calm can be very hard. I know that I've continued to be triggered from my own trauma. I actually have heard from several people on the road in the past week to say, I'm realizing how I was triggered by something that happened to a kid, and I had no idea that's what I was experiencing. Another example that I actually just thought of this morning that Elizabeth's hearing for the first time, which is probably fun because you've heard the same things for 5 days. One day, I was at a new elementary school, this is probably 2.5 years after the tornado. And it was a fine day, like it wasn't storming at all, but I think a car had hit an electrical box near us or something. So we're doing our morning activities, and I'm in the cafeteria, and we're doing breakfast, and the lights go out and kids scream. Huge trigger for me. With the tornado, lights went out, kids scream. So I flipped the brain again. I'm also the only one now in the cafeteria trying to help kids. It's really hard to ask me to be calm, right? But I did my best that I could. I did recognize what was going on for me and tried to process that and talk to myself. But then I walked out into the hallway after all the kids are out, and I have this angry parent. I don't know if you guys have ever had one of those. This angry parent about something unrelated to the day, very important to her, I'm sure. And she's like, I need to talk to you, Mrs. Ashley. And I looked at her and I said, I would love to talk to you. Now is not a good time. I need to walk in the office and get a drink, and I would be happy to talk to you in about 10 minutes. I couldn't do it. I was so triggered by what was happening that I had to be as calm as I could to convey a message of I care about what you are wanting, but I am not in the right place right now. So I did. I went to the office. I told my principal. I got a drink of water, which again helps with dysregulation. To get regulated, water is huge. Took some deep breaths, and I was able to walk back out and talk to that parent. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but find ways that help you stay calm. So the not personalizing is really, really important. I get on my soapbox about this. I'm a big believer in Brene Brown. She was the one who talked about empathy in the video. She's a researcher on shame and vulnerability at the University of Houston. She has 4 to 5, 6, I don't know how many books out right now, but they're all wonderful. She talks a lot about the difference in shame and guilt. Do you guys know the difference in shame and guilt? Maybe, not sure, could be. So shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am a mistake. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Really encourage your kids to stay in guilt. Shame does not lead to healthy decision making. guilt can help us recognize what we want to do differently. I will preach to you. You guys need to stay out of shame too. I don't know how many conversations I've had with teachers over the years that start shaming themselves whether they understand that or not. And maybe they're shaming other people as well. Usually it's protection for themselves, but most of the time we just take on that shame of, my kids aren't doing well, I'm having a bad day, I am a terrible teacher. Why do you think we're losing teachers so much? I really believe it's because we are shaming ourselves. Look, I'm not paid enough, so I don't get value there. My evaluation doesn't give me value there. I could go on forever. My kids aren't graduating. My kids aren't, recently somebody put on social media that a kid's motivation is directly under the teacher's control. Did you guys see that? It may or may not have been Marzano. There was a firestorm on social media. I don't know if he has recovered from that. I'm not sure. That's not true. It's not directly under your control. But I will say that sometimes we shame ourselves for what our kids are not capable of doing. Try not to personalize that. And then self-regulation and self-care. Take care of yourself. We talk about tap in and tap out. Elizabeth goes into that a little bit more. This is really helpful to also with goal setting with kids. We encourage you to do social emotional goal setting with your kids. So at the beginning of the year, you might ask parents, if you have some of the younger ones. If you have the older ones, you might ask the actual kids themselves, what are things you want to work on this year? Social and emotional. You can ask them socially. Maybe it's they want to make more friends. Maybe they want to get better at soccer. Who knows? I jokingly say, maybe your high school boys might say something like, I want to get a girlfriend. All right. Well, ask them in 3 weeks if they've found somebody to ask on a date or who they're taking to prom, things like that. That's okay. However, for self-regulation and self-care, what are your goals? And are you sharing those with your kids? Because I would encourage you, if you have them do a goal-setting form, which we have some examples, do one yourself. And I would even encourage you to post it in your room so that your kids can ask you about your goals. Maybe one of your goals is that you want to work out more. It's okay to tell your kids that. That's not too vulnerable. It's a little vulnerable. It's healthy vulnerability. And they can say, hey, Mrs. Ashley, you working out? And I'm probably going to say, no. Haven't worked out in 35 years. Probably won't start now. But at least I'm being honest with them. So we know the cycle of trauma is difficult and it's challenging. We know trauma happens. There's psychological damage. There's social emotional damage. And there's behavior problems. Guess what? I've experienced trauma. I've experienced these damaging situations, and I'm sometimes a behavior problem. You can ask my children and you can ask my husband, and they will be honest with you. There's times where my husband's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm just like, I'm dysregulated and my brain's not functioning. It's really awesome to be married to me, I promise. But too often we go to punishment. When we go to punishment with our kids, we send them back into the trauma cycle, and it just keeps going. I knew I was terrible. I knew nobody liked me. Nobody at the school wants me. The minute we say, get out of my class, you lost that kid. The minute you said, put your head down, I'm done with you, lost that kid. You just sent them right back into, you think they've heard that enough? That doesn't scare them. That doesn't worry them. Go to the principal's office. All right, been there before. What's the big deal? The minute you do something different, you connect with them, you have got them back. This is not a new way of teaching. This is a perspective shift. It's not a new way. It's not something new for you. Really, it's taking what you've been saying and it's changing the language. This is hard. This is really hard. These are things that I have actually heard in my schools in the last few years. But listen to the difference in my voice when I say these things. He is so defiant. Wow, he's really lacking social skills. She is choosing this behavior. She is reacting with adrenaline and survival skills. Can you imagine the teacher's lounge right now? How different this would feel, right? What is wrong with him? Wow, what happened to him? I don't need to call home. They want help anyway. Wow, I need to call home. That would give me more insight to what's going on. I will not tolerate disrespect in my classroom. How can I help him learn respect? It's a shift, and it's a hard shift, but it's a really important and worth it shift. So this is a great video about social emotional standards that were implemented in a school in Nevada. We are not going to show it to you, but it is really good, and if you want it, we will send it to you. I actually tweeted it the other day too, and I'll continue to tweet it. If you do follow me on Twitter, you'll get a lot of resources that I like to send out. But it is really cool to see how they implemented these standards, and they saw academic indicators really rise.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, so we're not going to have time to get through much more than probably this slide, but I do want to encourage you to go back and look at our slides if you want any more training that should be coming in the future also. But I do really want to get through this just to focus a little bit more on that perspective shift, that paradigm shift that has to happen in the classrooms. So if we are only focusing on punishment to correct behavior, then we're losing the battle. Because like she said, we have those students that are like, oh, send me to the principal's office. Or please, ISS, that's where I get to sleep. Or it's, I'm going to outlast you. I know how to outlast you. Give me all you got. So we really want to switch from punitive mindsets into a trauma-informed mindset. And a quote that I have heard in the last couple of weeks that is just keeps sticking out in my mind is challenging kids are only challenging because they've never been taught the skills how to not be challenging. So if you have that student, the I will not tolerate disrespect, that was a big one for me. I learned that that was one of my triggers to trauma that I had experienced. So first, I had to prepare myself. And I do encourage you, think about your triggers. Think about what triggers you in classrooms, students' behaviors that might trigger you, but also how are you going to regulate in that? Maybe that's having a team teacher, somebody on this staff, have a staff training that everybody has one phrase that they use that says, hey, I'm being triggered, or hey, I need help with a student here. And maybe it's as simple as, hey, can you come join me? And that lets his teacher know that I need help, I'm dysregulated, and I cannot be trauma-informed with this student right now. Or if you're walking past a teacher and you see that they're having a hard time, hey, can I join you? And having that culture in the school that it's not offensive, but it's really creating help, creating that support, creating ways to support you in what might be triggering you. But on that same note, so like that paradigm shift, we need to have consequences that teach a new pattern of behaviors. So I am not saying that no kid should ever get in trouble ever again. There should be no consequences, right? But we want to make sure that if whatever consequences there are, they are teaching new patterns of behavior. They're teaching those students how to not be disrespectful, what respect looks like, what healthy communication looks like, what healthy interactions between peers looks like. Because maybe they've never seen that before. Maybe they go home and yelling and being disrespectful is the only thing that they have ever seen. Maybe fighting is the only way they ever got attention. So teaching those new patterns of behaviors that teach respect and healthy communication. So punitive is the verbal reprimand, losing recess, no special, and seclusion from other kids. This seclusion from other kids, get out of my room, go out in the hallway, I'll deal with you later. Go to the principal's office. I've been guilty of those things. And then more I started going through this training, I realized that is rejection to those students. That is saying you are not welcome in this classroom, you're not welcome in this family, go out, I can't even deal with you right now. And then trauma-informed behavior, find out what's going on. I guarantee you don't have to know every student's story. You don't have to know exactly what's going on there, but I guarantee you if you ask a little bit of why the homework wasn't turned in, and a lot of times with students, it's because they didn't know where they were going to sleep that night, and they just got into an apartment with 5 of their other cousins at midnight and didn't have time to do homework. That's a lot easier to have a trauma-informed response when you see what's going on in the background. And you don't have to know those stories, but just assume, maybe there's a little bit something more going on there. Okay, so we are getting close on time, but I do just want to say that these punitive measurements, those are re-traumatizing to that student, and it's not going to teach those new patterns of behavior. And then the traumatizing cycle just keeps going, and the need for consequences or the actions or the student melting down continues and continues to get worse. Okay, so if you do want to take a picture of this book that is up here, we do suggest that. You can come up here and take a picture. We do have our cards up here as well. If you want our cards for any of this information, we are more than happy to email out anything we have. And if you need CEUs, just make sure you sign in and we will hand them out to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Will you send us this presentation? I know people say it to you all the time, but I need to come to my school.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm at El Reno.